Arts Commission, Public Art Committee, and Metro Arts staff are joining by conference call. In a moment, we will, yeah?
Thank you. Oh, just one moment. Oh, I see, Sade, you're recording. I just wanted to make sure we were doing that. Okay, sorry, you can go ahead.
Okay. Today, the Arts Commission, Public Art Committee, and Metro Arts staff are joining by conference call. In a moment, we will call roll of all members present. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the Metro Nashville YouTube channel, as well as the Arts Commission Nashville.gov site no later than 48 hours after the meeting. All votes will be made by roll call. All action items voted on at today's meeting will be reconfirmed at the next in-person meeting of the committee. Now, I encourage all participants on this call to stay muted and to use the raise hand WebEx function if they would like to speak. If any committee members are having technical difficulties with any of these functions, please let me know before we proceed. Excellent. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. For each committee member, I'm going to need you, when I call your name, to say, to verbally say present. Okay, Campbell West.
Present.
David John Walker.
Present.
Donna Gilliam.
Present.
Donna, did I say your last name right?
You certainly did.
Excellent. Paul Collins.
Present.
Excellent. Did I miss anybody? Alejandro, sorry. Alejandro?
I saw him earlier, just a second ago.
He's here. He's here. I think he just muted before I got him. Alejandro?
Needs to unmute.
I think there might be an audio issue.
Yeah, because I can't, he's unmuted and I can't hear him.
Alejandro, would you give us a thumbs up if you can hear us? Okay.
Okay.
But I want to make sure we can hear Alejandro too.
Do you have any suggestions on troubleshooting that before we go on?
Figure it out. I'm present.
There you are.
Oh,
There you
yay!
are. Excellent. Okay, super. I'm going to call for a motion that this meeting agenda constitutes essential business of this body and that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans considering the COVID-19 outbreak and is permitted under the governor's executive order number 16. I need someone to propose a motion to this effect. And please remember to state your full name when making a motion or a second. If anyone would like to use the raise hand feature to make that motion, I would be glad to call on you. Paul?
I, Paul Collins, make said motion.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Do we have a second? Alejandro?
I, Alejandro, second that.
Excellent. Thank you. If anyone has comments on this motion, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Alejandro, will you just put your hand down if you don't actually have any comment? Super, thank you. Great, now we're going to do a roll call vote on approving this motion. Alejandro?
Approve.
Great. Campbell?
Approve.
David?
I approve.
Donna?
I approve.
Paul?
I approve.
Excellent. The motion has been approved. I'm now going to pass the meeting over to Van Maravalli, the Metro Public Arts Manager, for a welcome and brief overview of the Metro Public Arts section selection process. Van?
Thank you, Nikki. And you know what? You are a champ. You get a gold medal in navigating that first part. So thank you, Nikki. We appreciate that. I know we live in a complicated meeting world right now. I am so excited to be here with you all today. And before the fabulous public art team kind of takes the baton and presents their action items, I just want to lay the groundwork for our action items, which will be kind of more discussion based than we do kind of typically. And the reason for that is we need your expertise and your insight and questions, concerns, et cetera, about what we are presenting today. And in order to make sure that we are all on the same page, because most of what we are going to be in dialogue about involves our typical selection process. I know most of our committee is new. And while you did training, I know that was a lifetime ago. So I'm going to do a lightning round recap of kind of what our typical process is, so you understand what we're doing, what we're proposing to do differently, and why. So we can go to the next slide, Grace. So for our typical percent for art public art selection process, a good part of kind of the first few steps is done somewhat internally at the staff level, although we are in constant communication with particularly with council members and other metro departments who do have new construction or new capital projects. So we work to identify a site. Once that site is identified, we're going through kind of our a loose concept plan. So that means if it's likely to be a suspended piece or if it's indoor outdoor, and we're also deciding what the selection method will be. At that point, we then kind of do a quick check-in with our stakeholders, let them know what's going on. It comes to PAC. We let you know what our game plan is. That's kind of the step we're at today with the next two action items. And then it is turned over to the citizen selection panel. And so this is kind of the point where we're going to start to diverge a little bit, and we'll share more about that plan. And my next slide is going to be the composition of that citizen selection panel, so just hang in there with me. So the citizen selection panel is typically, we work with council members, other stakeholders, or metro partners to identify who that panel should be. And we do have specific rules and regulations and recommendations around the composition of that citizen selection panel, and that's defined by our public art guidelines. So we typically do bring that back to PAC and Commission as well for approval. And then we issue our call to artist. And so while people are applying for the project, we are also behind the scenes starting to coordinate that future selection panel meeting. And if there's any online voting, that's also when we're kind of preparing our citizen panelists to work through that online. We have either an online first round of scoring and or an in-person meeting. Typically after, if all goes according to plan, after that first meeting, we are walking away with 3 to 5 semifinalists. Typically those semifinalists are invited back for, or invited to Nashville for an in-person site visit. And depending on the budget, if it's smaller, we will do something by phone or electronically, so we're not necessarily flying people into town. That short list of artists is given an opportunity, oftentimes to speak with selection panelists, neighbors, residents, field questions from us, and then they come back with a proposal or a follow-up interview. And after that, the selection panel is taking a final score and identifying who they would like to award the commission to. Once we have our finalist, then we're bringing it back to PAC and back to commission. Once we do that, then we start the contract process. So most important to this conversation will be our next slide, which is the composition of the citizen selection panel. So we can go to the next one, Grace. Oh, that slide looks funky. It was doing that to me earlier. Okay, I will squint and do my best to read this one because it's not showing up correctly. But here we are, and we will just roll with it. So typical panels are made up of between 5 to 9 individuals. We really kind of decide whether it's 5, 9, somewhere in between, based on the budget and how complex or large the project is. This panel includes professional artists. That one is always a little tricky for us because many times our local artists who would love to kind of serve on this panel and give us their insight are also trying to apply. And then we have design professionals. Sometimes that includes folks who are involved in the project from the construction side of things. Site representatives, so typically if we're working with another metro department, we do give them a vote. And we have one non-voting PAC member who acts as our chair. So when someone agrees to serve on a selection panel, they have to first fit into one of these categories. They have to be a resident of Nashville, Davidson County, and they're committing to now these days, because we have so many folks apply to our calls, it's at least a 2-day selection or 2-day long meetings to accomplish the selection process. At this point, we consider all of our panelists to be volunteers, and they are not paid. There are cities and there's precedents for paying panelists. That is not something that we have done on the public art side of things, but I think that's something that we'd like to discuss as well. So hopefully that kind of refreshes everyone's mind and memory. But of course, while we're listening to both Trey and Leslie present their alternate plans for these 2 selection processes, we are happy to answer questions or pause if there's something that's unclear. So just raise that hand. I'll keep an eye out so our 2 presenters don't have to. Nikki, will you help me do that as well? Great. Okay. Any questions before I pass it on to Trey? David.
Are there opportunities is there an age cutoff? Like, are there people that under 18 can be part of this selection panels?
No, we have not had anybody under the age of 18, but that is a great question. And I think one that is worth revisiting when we hear Trey present the Kossie Gardner scope and his really awesome idea for kind of tailoring a slightly different selection process specifically for this project. So put a pin in it. The answer is no as of yet.
I'm not ready to take over. I can't tell if there's more questions.
I don't see any other hands.
I think take it away.
It's all
Awesome.
you, Trey.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all are doing well. Today I'm going to kind of revisit Kossie Gardner Senior Park, and we're going to propose a selection method and as well as a budget for the first installation. Grace, if you'll proceed. Thank you. So just to recap kind of about this project, the site is located at 1606 Jefferson Street. That's just across from One Drop Inc. and Woodcuts Gallery, also Fisk University, and it borders Interstate 40. It actually looks over Interstate 40. If some of you know where JT's barber shop used to be, it's kind of right in that area. So we're proposing for this first installation a $50,000 budget. The scope is not limited to a specific medium. It is a wall that we're proposing the installation goes on, but we're open to murals, 2D, 3D, and multimedia artworks. We hope that this can be an installation that rotates every year and a half or 2 years. We're kind of inspired by the Rose Kennedy Greenway in Boston and have been kind of researching their program. Basically, they have a program that they partner with the Greenways organization as well as local arts organizations and kind of rotate in a similar way, but it's always kind of matching. So there's always some programming going on within one of their local arts organizations or education institutions that kind of directly plays on what's installed at the Greenway itself. So the site and budget has already been approved for the construction of the wall. Construction is in progress right now. And Grace, if you'll go to that next slide. This is what the site looks like, or the wall specifically looks like as of yesterday. If you'll see, I guess I don't think, is there a way I can point by any chance? It's okay if not, I can. If you'll see on that left picture, there's a kind of a gap on the left side of the wall. That will be kind of a translucent panel that will actually look over Interstate 40 and will kind of tell the story of how that disrupted the community. On that left side, so the artwork wall is this wall that has varying heights. It's actually 77 feet long, but the heights vary and the angles kind of cut in and out, which provides kind of a unique surface. So it's not just kind of a typical straight, flat, rectangle surface. So it provides a unique opportunity. And on the left, there will be a historical panel that specifically will talk about the history of the community as regards to who was Kossie Gardner Sr. himself and his entrepreneurial ventures in Nashville and kind of his contribution, as well as the local contribution and cultural landmarks that used to be in this area, such as Brown's Diner and Club Del Morocco. And then it also talks about the history of Fisk, Meharry, Tennessee State, and American Baptist College, and their importance in the Black community, and a number of other things as it relates to North Nashville and the Black middle class in Nashville. Grace, if you could go to the next slide. So for this project, we've been doing a lot of reflection lately within the organization amidst our practices across the board and in terms of equity and community ownership and involvement. So we kind of we're going to try to think of a different way to act within our public art guidelines, but kind of shift the process and kind of create more authorship for our community members. So in this new proposed community advisory panel, we would have panels who would serve in a typical citizen selection panel role. So all those things that Van kind of went through, they would still be involved in that. They would just have a few additional responsibilities. So our proposal would be that we would reach out to specific community organizations and ask them as organizations to participate and nominate representatives. Typically, we've kind of gone to individuals, but there's a lot of times where opportunities come across our desk and maybe it comes to me and it's perfect for Ann Leslie or Attilio or Van. And, so it just gives us an opportunity to get someone in that organization who's going to be really committed and into it, rather than kind of picking one person and say yes or no, and then okay, I'll do it. But and David, hopefully that gives an opportunity, for younger people. I think that's always been my kind of advocacy point for the young people, is like, how can we get involved in the process? And I know giving young people responsibility is scary at times, but especially for artwork like this, and it's really for them and their community, and they're going to be impacted by it. So it does make sense. They have a right as well. So our goals through this process are to establish a more equitable and community-based selection process. We hope it's more transparent and allow some of our community partners to kind of understand how we work and how we create these call to artists and establish these budgets and different things that end up as permanent public artworks. And then also establish organic opportunities for community programming with the projects, and that community visioning that happened prior to the actual budget and scope was announced. The community was very interested in multi-generational representation and specific community programming tied to the installation. So we think that working with community organizations who are already doing that work kind of on a daily basis and are already grassroots, on boots on the ground in the community, there's already, I'm sure, millions of programming, not millions, but you know what I mean, a lot of programming going on that we don't know about that we could just tap into, or that they might feel could easily be related. So that's kind of our goal there. Grace, if you'll go to the next slide. So the potential advisory panel composition would be 7 members. They would be representatives, community organizations, and institutions. Specifically, we would want organizations closely connected to the project site in that community. That could be, partners such as TSU, Fisk, Magruder, Gideon's Army, Jump, Jefferson Street Art Call, et cetera. These are just kind of ideas, and we can go through and brainstorm some more a bit later. Of course, at minimum, we have to have a professional artist, and we do want members with specific expertise in public art, visual arts, or contemporary art in some aspect. So while we do want to honor the community, we do want to make sure we have someone there who, has experienced this work before, has been around it. Grace, would you like to go to the next slide? Thank you. So for the panel's responsibilities, they would serve as a normal voting member on the citizen selection panel. I think what's different specifically is that established selection criteria and scoring metrics alongside staff. So typically when we're creating our call to artists and we're drafting these, we as staff pretty much author, the scoring criteria, the themes of the artwork, and we don't work just personally and make things up, but there is a bit of a disconnect. There is kind of some room to go even further and involve the community in that process. They would also assist staff with artist outreach, and by that I mean they would have access to artists or people in the community who they think would be specifically beneficial from this, or who would specifically benefit from this project or might be interested. They would also identify overall themes and goals for the installation, which would go out in that call to artists. Grace, if you go to the next slide. Thank you. They would evaluate concepts and community programming plans that would be submitted by the semifinalists, and I'll kind of go through the entire process in a couple slides. And then they would recommend the final artist to the Public Art Committee. This advisory panel, we would ask them to commit to participating in 4 to 5 virtual meetings and workshops throughout this process. And we think it's important that we offer them a stipend if we are going to ask them to do this work, to cover their time, expertise, and dialogue. We typically don't offer stipends to our citizen selection panels, but in this case, we're asking them to do a little bit more work and research and contribute a little more. So I think it would be a nice gesture to show that we value their time and expertise by doing that. And then Grace, if you would go to the next slide. So this is just kind of the selection process as it would look for the specific project. We would still have a selection panel, our typical selection panel. It would include a PAC rep, a parks rep, and procurement rep as well. And then the rest of those members would be filled in the advisory panel, who would kind of also meet with the selection panel, and then also have their own kind of separate meetings, which I'll go over here. First, sorry, I missed one. I apologize. Prior to this call to artists being released, we would meet with the advisory panel and kind of go over the call to artists, kind of have a workshop of things, and ultimately decide on those things in terms of themes and goals for the project and selection criteria. We would then release the call to artists. The selection panel would review those selections and select a semifinalist, which we would bring back here for PAC approval. And then the semifinalists, we propose that we would do a kind of a light concept community programming plan. So it wouldn't be a final concept. I don't think as much as, for the Korean veterans, I think they were like pretty final concepts. But, just, Van, correct me if I'm wrong, but we would just want them to submit kind of an idea and specifically how the community could interact with the project and the artwork. And then prior to submitting, we would want to usually we would do an in-person site visit, but it makes sense right now to just plan for a virtual workshop. And I think in that's when we would really want the community members that we have on the advisory panel to kind of connect with the selected artists and kind of give them as good of a site visit that we can give them virtually. And then the final artist would be recommended, and we would continue with our typical contract negotiation and execution of community programming and installation. So, sorry, I know I threw a lot at you in a short amount of time, but these are just a couple of things I was hoping could kind of guide our discussion. And first, I just am curious to know how you all generally feel about, switching things up like this. I know it's not too dramatic, but it is new for us. And then, yeah, if you guys have any other potential partnering organizations that you think would really work well in this type of model, I'd really appreciate those recommendations. But yeah, I will open it up to the PAC for any comments or questions. Campbell, I think, is your hand raised?
It is. Hey, Trey. Thank
Hi,
you
how
for
are
that
you?
thoughtful reconsideration of the guidelines. I think they're all great, especially the stipends and involving organizations. I have a question about the project itself, just for some clarity. So
Okay.
the wall itself is like 77 feet, right? Are we talking one artist per installation, so that artist will take the entire wall, or are we talking several artists for each year and a half, 2-year installation?
I don't think I think we do offer artist teams when we have our application. So I think we would, like our typical call to artists, have it open for artist teams to apply, but we would only select one artist or artist team for this first installation.
Right.
And then, 2 years or a year and a half from now, we would try to continue that and rotate it.
Okay, that makes more sense thematically. I just didn't know if we were talking a few artists together and then it becomes sort of a different vision versus one artist or one artist team. That was just clarification. But yeah, I think all the changes and guidelines are great, especially looking at what other cities are doing, stipends and other things. I think it's important for, people's time and buy-in. Thank you.
And to your point, Campbell, I do think, we're trying to be really thoughtful and calculated in this first artist selection. However, I do think once we get our sea legs and we get through this first commission, we have thought about, is this something where the artist who is featured, like the great example Trey gave of the Rose Kennedy Greenway, if there's something if someone has an exhibit at TSU and they want to have their students do some kind of collaborative work on the wall that remains there, or there's an apprenticeship opportunity, or maybe it's something that even connects back to other Metro Arts programs, like our restorative justice work. I think we see immense possibilities, both in the artistic medium, but also in kind of the way we're identifying potential artists to program this space. So I think we're gonna play it safe a little bit this first time around, and then we're definitely excited to kind of see where it grows.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Paul, it looks like your hand is raised as well.
Yeah, my hand's raised. Hey, Van, there was a ton of nuance put into your response there, and I don't think I understand all this what you're getting at.
Thank you.
I guess my first question for Trey, or my first thought is that I think this sounds like a really great way to run a selection committee. It seems hyper localized or wonderfully localized. And so one question I have is whether this is a plan you hope to apply for all your selection committees, because it seems really thoughtful and engaged. That's one question. But about Van's response, I guess I have a lot of questions, because it sounds like an ongoing collaborative community programming
Yes.
space. And so I guess first questions first. Do you see this as a blueprint for running your further future public arts committee selection, art selection committees?
Yeah, I do think so, and I have to give the credit to Trey. We've been kind of wrestling with the best way to approach this project, and yeah, Trey has spent a lot of time and energy developing this methodology and these ideas. So I'm so excited to see how it plays out, and I'm really impressed with everything that Trey's brought to the table. I do think it's given us pause to think about possibly updating our public art guidelines. So in order to do that, we would have to bring those changes to this body. So I think as public art manager, that's something that I'm going to set time aside to make sure that gets done. I do think we are seeing that, things change. Our program has evolved. Nashville has changed. We are looking at the body of our work and the investments we're making in a totally different way than when those guidelines were created, and they have served us very well. However, I do think it is absolutely time to kind of rethink where it feels like the priority lies. When we were going through we do a practice run of the presentation, and Trey brought up a great point that it feels like how we used to structure decisions around who was invited to vote as a panelist. There was just a lot of emphasis and power given to folks inside of Metro or site partners or design professionals who were financially connected to the project as architects or designers, et cetera, et cetera. So while I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, I also don't know that it's a true reflection of the values that we hold now as an agency. And I do think we have been for the last several years kind of moving towards making major decisions based on the project and what is right for that specific community, or how we need to kind of pivot or remain flexible in certain aspects so that we're able to tailor both the selection process, but also the creation of the call and other critical decisions in partnership with the community, instead of kind of in our own silo where we're doing our best to kind of anticipate what we think people want. Or, we heard feedback in a community meeting, but a lot of times the folks who show up to those community meetings are the folks who are always showing up to those community meetings. So the idea of kind of widening kind of the pool of individuals that we're looking at and recruiting to kind of assist us as thought partners, not just approvers, it is absolutely something that we want to implement in other projects.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. And that gives me a nice background. I guess I want to give you some feedback, and that is that the language sounds like it's a big change in terms of your presentation, but the approach seems very incremental, and it seems very wise and grounded. some of the language that, like I would describe the dynamic you're presenting as a rebalancing of agency with giving more to the local community. And I think that that's perfect for right now. And I think maybe you could say that even stronger and make this an important push to get buy-in from people in the community so they understand that this is what's actually happening. Anyway, I wouldn't want to hide this.
No, I think that's really great feedback, and that's where the place we've been functioning from. But it's always good to hear when something that we feel like is at the forefront, it doesn't necessarily translate when we're presenting it, because you're right, it's both kind of subtle and radical at the same time. It might not seem like a big deal to invite panelists and community members to help us create a call to artists, but that's like mind-blowing right now for us too. So yes, I do appreciate that. And Paul, your second question about all the jargon, I just spewed, and I realized that was probably confusing for our new PAC members. So when we first brought this project to the PAC, we had had some really frank conversations with our partners and colleagues at the Parks Department to say, we're excited to be involved, but if we're thinking about this wall as a space that we're programming every few years or so, we can't necessarily be on the hook exclusively for that funding. And we did feel like that was actually, I don't even think that we had to have that conversation, because Parks graciously said, let's figure out what a friends group means. Let's figure out how we, share responsibility, both in the management of this, but also the funding of it. And so, in addition to kind of testing out this new selection model, we will also be exploring what it means to kind of co-manage a space, or to not be the sole funders forever and ever. I also think that's an interesting conversation, thinking about the organizations that we're asking to kind of be involved in the selection process and programming. I think we want to stay open to seeing where these new relationships or these strengthened relationships could lead us, if that's something that we feel like could be could be shared within our own department. So we also run a restorative justice program, and so a lot of that work involves young people who are currently incarcerated, or have experienced incarceration, or have had some kind of interaction or touch point with juvenile court. We have had some really, really amazing artists who have spent a lot of time and energy with those students. And I think that's a great example of both something we'd be interested in kind of using this space for one year, if it's, if it's a resident artist, an artist in residence who's bringing the students that they're working with through the court system, or bringing somebody else in nationally, locally. Those are all the things that we're kind of dreaming up while we're trying to get this first artwork up and for everyone to enjoy.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Paul, for your comments. I might reach out to you if that's okay a little bit later.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you.
Campbell, your hand is still raised. Do you have something else you want to add, or nope, you've taken your hand away. Any other comments for Trey or questions? Okay. Well, if there's no further discussion, I'd love to ask Trey to give us the staff motion.
Yes, for sure. Grace, if you don't mind going to that next slide. Thank you. Staff recommends PAC's approval of a $50,000 budget and the updated selection process for the inaugural installation for the rotating public art canvas at Kossie Gardner Senior Park.
Thank you, Trey. Paul.
Thank you.
I so move.
Excellent. Will you just say your name for the record?
Paul Collins.
Excellent. Do I have a second?
Donna Gilliam
David?
seconds that motion.
Oh, super. Thank you, Donna.
Mhm.
Now we're going to do a roll call to vote on the motion. Campbell.
Campbell West, I approve.
Thank you. Donna.
Donna Gilliam, I approve.
Thank you. Alejandro.
Alejandro Cierto, I approve.
Thank you. David.
David Walker, I approve.
Excellent. And Paul.
Paul Collins, I approve.
Excellent. And I'm Nikki Kaufman, and I approve as well. Excellent.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
I think we'll now consider our next action item regarding the public art acquisitions artworks phase 2 selection process. I'm going to pass it off to public art project manager Ann Leslie Owens for a presentation on the initiative.
Thank you. And can you all hear me? Yes, good. Good afternoon. Today we are coming back to you with a public art acquisition project that PAC discussed and approved a budget for at our June meeting. This would be a phase 2 of our popular artworks collection currently in place at the historic Metro Courthouse and the Metro Office Building. Excuse me. The discussion we want to have today will help us to determine the composition of the selection panel and frame the call to artists currently under development. Based on this discussion that we're going to have today, we hope to have a motion and approval of the selection panel. And Grace, if you'll go to the first slide. So to recap, at our June meeting, staff presented this opportunity to support artists that have been impacted by the tornado and the many closures related to COVID-19. We proposed to do this through the selection and purchase of 2D artworks submitted for consideration by local artists. This method of acquisition allows us to make purchases fairly quickly, which is important given the many challenges artists are currently facing, and also allows us to include artwork from artists with studio and gallery practices who might otherwise have few opportunities to engage with a public art collection. The intense challenges of this year facing us all have revealed the undeniable strengths of Nashville's communities. These attributes provide great opportunities for inspiration for this collection. With a focus on community, artwork could reference such qualities as identity, pride, resilience, empowerment, memory, connection, strength, and transformation. Aspects of community that speak to the past, present, and future of Nashville. So based on this need and this opportunity, the PAC approved a budget of $100,000 and gave staff the approval to continue discussions with library and general services. Grace, if you go to the next slide. So as Van just explained, we have our typical composition of the selection panel as outlined in the public art guidelines. While we could pull together a distinct selection panel specifically for this purchase, I can't imagine that we'd assemble a team any better suited to this deliberation than this public art committee. You all represent visual artists, gallery owners, and design professionals. Many of you have curatorial experience. Our working artists would be especially valuable, lending their expertise to ensure that this process works smoothly and in a very straightforward manner for our local artists. Paul, for example, has even been on the other side. Before he was on the PAC, he responded to the phase 1 call, and several of his works are currently in the Metro Office Building. Omari, who's unfortunately not with us today, he has experience having chaired the first selection panel for the historic courthouse. In addition to the experience you bring, there is the matter of timing. Having the PAC serve as the selection panel can certainly streamline the entire selection and approval process. Additionally, staff recommends Donna Gilliam, with her background in interiors and visual arts, to serve as the non-voting chair of the selection panel. And if there is interest in reaching out beyond the Public Art Committee for selection panelists, staff would be happy to make suggestions from the Artworks Phase 1 artist. Their voices would certainly be appreciated and might in fact be needed if we are trying to get to that required 5 or 7 or even 9 members on the selection panel. So as you are considering your own participation in the selection panel, I wanted to share what we're thinking as far as a proposed schedule. We're thinking of having the first and perhaps second round of review that would be done individually, online through Submittable, that happening in late August. And that, of course, is after staff had reviewed for eligibility. So you'd only be looking at the ones that we had declared were eligible based on the call guidelines. Then we would have final rounds of review. That would be a WebEx call similar to this conference call, and that might happen in early September. And that's when we would have that final deliberation to select the artworks to purchase. It's hard to tell how many hours this will ultimately take, but we expect it will be no more than 6 or 7 hours total. It truly depends on the number of submissions that we receive. Grace, if you'll go to the next slide, please. So in addition to the selection panel discussion, and we hope to have with you, we've also been giving a lot of thought to the call to artist itself. There are some options that we have discussed that will have a pretty big impact on the artist and artwork eligibility and how the selection panel operates. So we decided to lean on the expertise of the Public Art Committee. Some of those considerations are these here. We've talked about how many submissions would be allowable per artist. You know, certainly from the artist point of view, it's hard to decide which one to submit when there's a call. If we were to say, for example, allow up to 3 submissions, artwork submissions per artist, the pro of that would be, well, there's just more options for the selection panel to choose from. The con would be the same thing, more options for the selection panel to choose from. For example, if we had 100 artists interested in this and they each submitted three artworks, we're looking at 300 artworks to carefully consider. So that is definitely something we want to think about carefully. The next thing we have been thinking about is, well, if we were to offer, allow multiple submissions, would we then limit the purchase to 1 artwork from a single artist? The pro of doing it that way is that it would allow us to support more artists, bringing more artists in the collection if, certain artists, aren't having multiple selections and purchases. The con of that is that for the, as far as the process, we're adding in another level in the selection process. So not a full round, but for those artists who did offer multiple artworks for our consideration, we would have to kind of go back and then figure out which one of theirs that we would be interested in purchasing. Another consideration deals with the artists who are already in our artworks collection. Are these artists eligible for this call in this phase after they've already been a part of the courthouse and the Metro office building? The pro of that is that, this provides more options for us and for the artist as they explore this new phase and this new theme. The con is that it may not encourage the addition of new artists to our collection if we have them in both of those. And if you will go to the next slide, please. So ultimately, after we have this discussion, we would like to have a motion regarding the approval of a selection panel that the PAC determines how that is composed. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you. Nikki is the chair.
Thank you. I would love to open the floor to discuss the topics presented by Ann Leslie, and I see David already has a question. David.
I was ready to make a motion, but we're still at the discussion phase.
Let's talk about it first. But David, I'm definitely calling on you for the motion. You got it. Anyone have any sort of discussion? I think Ann Leslie has laid out sort of 3 specific things that she wants us to think and talk about in terms of eligibility. Campbell, go ahead.
We are discussing the eligibility requirements.
Yeah.
So it's those three kind of eligibility submission questions, but also anybody who wants to volunteer to serve on the selection panel, because we did get approval from this group for a PAC staff review panel. So
Gotcha. Well, just a couple of questions. Since I was part of the first round with Metro to the gallery. So when we say artist, are we still taking submissions from galleries? And if so, would that gallery be proposing an artwork or 3 from each artist, or are we taking that back to individual artists? Because if it's a gallery, I just want to be clear, can they submit more than one artist, or are we taking galleries out of, or is it just going to be individual artist submissions?
I think we have always been thinking that, in the same way we've done it before, that galleries could submit for their artist. So a gallery might be submitting for multiple artists. And for that artist, if we decide, we want multiples, then yes, that would mean even multiples per artist.
Gotcha. Okay. And just thoughts. I don't know if the submissions for you guys up to 3 as a staff, if that overwhelms you all. I think it's a good idea to have up to 3. I mean, most artists will work in the, a similar body, but if that's not overwhelming for you all, I think it's a good idea. And then to the third point, with with artworks in phase 1, would they be eligible for phase 2? I would think there's room for both. I think that a lot of artists that learned about the program after the program that I've heard from were excited to apply in another round, while the artists that were included before, it might be a good extension of their thematic work. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Campbell. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for adding to the discussion. David, your hand is still raised. Is that for the motion, or do you want to talk? Nope, you've put it down. Paul, go ahead.
Let's see. I think that I would favor artists who have not been selected, and the chance to, whether we know it or not, we're always dealing with some sort of lens. Anyway, I would really like to spread the wealth, and I'd like to get more voices in the collection. I'm concerned about galleries submitting for artists, and artists also submitting their work. So then you have not 3 but 6 or more pieces from an individual artist. That doesn't quite sound right to me. I wonder about targeting it to artists who have been affected in the last year by the effects of the pandemic, homelessness, the tornado. We have a lot of very local concerns with our community, and I think that we've got a place for one of the organizations I work with is Poverty in the Arts, and it's a huge group of artists I never knew. They don't know about this. They make great work. So I would love to see, as opposed to having a lot of the same people apply, sort of reaching out in a local way, the way you're doing with our previous discussion, if possible.
And that's a great point, Paul. We've actually we've been working that question of need and you know, trying to figure out who's really hurting. And I do think, you know, a huge catalyst for moving this through so quickly is because we do want to get money into the pockets of local artists, especially folks who are hurting because shows were canceled, or you know, their employment status has changed, or they've lost, you know, work or live space. And we have created a prompt, a nice prompt that we've been using on a few other recent artist applications that asks that exact question. So I think that's spot on. And there's, yeah, it's easy for us to kind of plug that into our process and into the application, so we can factor that into the decision-making process.
It's sort of implied in a way by some of the criteria of the strengths that
Yeah.
highlight, but again, I think it could be more targeted, louder.
Yep.
Thank you, Paul. David?
Yeah, I was gonna just add, I agree with Paul. I don't think that galleries really should be eligible to submit, but I do think they should be eligible to recommend. So if there are artists, just to make sure that we don't double down on who's submitting and where we're getting work from, they can submit artists, but have those artists submit to the selection panel.
Can anyone maybe on the staff speak to how that process worked last round?
Yes, I can. And I probably was not clear in my response to Campbell. So we open this up to galleries representing their artist to make the submission, but then the same artist was not submitting themselves. So for any given artist, there was only one submission. There wasn't a duplicate from their gallery as well as from the artist individually. It was one or the other. But yes, we had, you know, several galleries who did that. It's just part of their role and in the way, you know, their agreement with their artist and how they represent them. And we had, you know, probably 6 or 7 different galleries that participated in this way previously.
David, Paul, does that address your concerns in any way? Does that sway how you're thinking? Do you still think no galleries? David?
Well, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, if the artist is not going to submit on their own, then I think that's fine. If they're using representation in order to submit.
Paul?
For the record, this is a revenue stream for the galleries.
Exactly.
It's not altruistic, but they're arts organizations. But we should recognize that.
Well, and they're part of the arts organizations that have been impacted by COVID as well. So we're kind of seeing them as an extension, you know, of the artist and part of the arts community that we want to help with this.
Anyone else?
I do think that the question I hear and agree with both sides of the gallery debate. I will say, I think in kind of a secondary way, purchasing local artist work from galleries, not just local galleries, but I think that incentivizes all of our galleries to value our local artists just as much as, you know, someone who is located elsewhere. You know, I think it's a good incentive to maximize representation and to kind of I don't know. I think it speaks to some equity issues that inevitably exist in the gallery model, as they do in all arts funding and the sale and representation of art. So I will say, from the last round, the galleries that did have artists who they rep selected and who we purchased work from are also local galleries who put a huge emphasis on supporting local artists, repping them, and also kind of doing that in a nurturing way. So artists who maybe haven't had representation previously or whose work isn't necessarily, you know, ready to it's not exhibit ready. So I think there's a little bit of a trickle down benefit, but I think at the end of the day, we're also just looking for, we're looking to fund great art. We're looking to buy great art from folks who need it. And I don't think that we can make a wrong decision, but I do defer to what this body ultimately decides.
So I feel like it might actually help us to break these down, just so we get a sense of where everyone's feeling on this.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could move through the list one at a time. The first question on the table is whether to accept multiple artworks per artist. So can I focus the discussion for just a second on that point, and whether we feel comfortable with multiple or with only one? And can the staff speak to Campbell's question about whether it's overwhelming to receive multiple submissions per artist?
I don't think it will be overwhelming. It just probably is something we'll factor into how we set up the submittable forms, whether it's by artwork or, within an individual artist. If we have multiples within that, artist submission. So it just pretty much just, is going to impact how we set up the call and then set up the voting rounds to make this as streamlined as possible.
But one versus three is not backbreaking for you. Like if it's three, that's not problematic.
No, and I will say if we do decide to limit eligibility only to artists who are not part of a previous phase, then I think that also opens up capacity. And if we feel like three isn't enough, I also want to have that conversation, so just putting that out there.
And just to clarify, in the eligibility question, it would not be anyone who applied. It would only be anyone who was selected.
Whose work we have already purchased and exist in our collection.
Okay. So just sort of circling us back to the multiple artworks per artist or a single artwork, does anyone have strong feelings about that they want to share?
Nikki, this is Donna.
Hey, Donna.
I don't think my little hand raise button is working. I've been clicking. I may not know how to work it. I wanted to. First of all, I think having multiple works from artists, I think that's a great idea, particularly if the staff can handle that. But I'd like to just circle back just a minute about Paul and David's comments, and I understand their concerns. One of the things that I was thinking, we have the galleries, and they, I think, are an extension of a marketing effort that actually helps this program because they know of artists that maybe, they could tell artists about things that wouldn't ordinarily hear about it. But I think what we could do is also really look at how we could reach those underserved artists at this point who have really been hit, who may not be represented by a gallery, who may not have a lot of internet connectivity at this point, to hear about this call, but putting as part of this criteria for us and our work, how are we going to make a concerted effort to reach those artists who have been underrepresented and who have been hit really hard or out of work, and it's already tough being an artist anyway, as we know. So that would be one thing that I think would be just a great thing to consider on our behalf, to make it. Yeah. Sorry, that's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Donna. And feel free to just chime in if you can get your little hand to work. I don't want you to feel like we're not listening. Anyone else want to weigh in on the multiple? I've not heard anyone say I think it should be limited to one. So if you feel that way, this would be your moment to tell me that. Okay.
I was going to say that I think it should be, I don't think it should be limited to one, but I think if we purchase or select, it should be limited to one purchase.
Okay, so that's exactly where we're headed on the next question. So thank you for taking us there. Anyone else want to weigh in on that question? I'm looking. I don't see any hands. Okay. So what I'm hearing, without additional feedback, what I'm hearing is that you guys align with what David suggested. Would you say that that's correct?
Yes.
We need a thumbs up on this interface.
I know.
Yeah.
Okay, super. I'm gonna assume we all feel the same way about that. Okay, now we come to the question of, if you submitted in phase 1, are you eligible to submit in phase 2? If you were selected in phase 1, are you eligible to submit in phase 2? So now can we have a sort of a quick discussion just about that point? I know several folks have weighed in. Alejandro, I feel like I haven't given you the opportunity to speak. If you want it, it is yours.
Yeah, I would also agree a little bit with Paul's comment to open up or to make sure that the artists that are selected are diverse, and to encourage people who have not yet been in the collection to be eligible in that way. I think that folks who've already been in the collection, while that's great and we value their work, I think it's thinking about this moment and thinking about the sort of future and the legacy of this collection, it would be great to sort of have a as diverse as possible selection, a group of works to select from.
Okay, excellent. I do have one question for the staff on that point, which is, are we worried that we won't get enough submissions if we limit it?
I don't have that concern. I will hand it over to Ann Leslie. I think we had a wonderful turnout for the first phase, and I do think, yes, we purchased artworks by a lot of fabulous artists and some of my favorite Nashville-based artists, but there's a lot of talent was still on that list who it kind of broke our heart that they were skipped over. So I do think, as long as those folks are not discouraged by not being picked the first round, I do think I think, we could also do an even better job this time around, doubling down on making sure that we're reaching out not just to kind of the typical outlets that artists are plugged into, but really thinking about how do we make sure we are reaching an even more diverse pool of artists who might not be in regular dialogue with us.
And Van,
yes,
on that topic, is that something that maybe we want to think about, really quickly? Like, do we want to pull together a community-based group? I know David or Paul, I can't remember who works with an organization currently that deals with artists, who are impoverished per se. Just a quick, we can put together a quick marketing strategy. How are we going to really reach those people?
Yeah, I think that's I think Poverty in the Arts, which is who Paul was referencing, that's a great example of kind of expanding our lens beyond just individual artists who have representation or don't have representation, but that we do have not a huge number, but several arts nonprofits around town.
Yeah.
Many of whom we've got great relationships with because they are our grantees. So I completely agree. I think that's one of the reasons why we're so excited that you've agreed to be the chair for this, and that we're trying to kind of bring these discussions to PAC instead of just asking you all to kind of rubber stamp what we've already figured out. So that's really helpful, and I agree. I think that would be a great strategy.
Hey, this is Paul here. Donna, you agreed already?
Yeah, I did. If
I'm
you
good
want.
with you. I'll be on the committee.
Okay, great. Who's next?
Who's going to join the party?
I can also join. I'd be happy to join.
Yay!
Yay.
Thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
And once the call is open, we'll share kind of the whole template, how to apply all that information. So even our PAC members who are not serving on the selection committee will still, graciously and humbly request that you help us spread the word within your own networks and circles. So we'll get that all kind of packaged up pretty and in a way that's easy for you guys to distribute that.
Sorry, but I will.
Nikki, we lost Nick. We lost you.
Yeah. Hold on. I'm trying. I'm sorry, guys. Oh my gosh. Okay, my back.
You back? Yes.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear any of that. So, Campbell, did you get your question answered?
Oh, I needed that last thing.
You missed the party, Nikki. You missed the party.
No, I haven't asked anything yet, but if I may, I do have
Campbell, the floor
One
is
thought
yours.
about marketing. Obviously, a good partner would be the ABC. I know that when I've done things with them through the gallery, we find and I mentor so many artists that we would not be representing at the gallery. And right now, I'm getting lots of questions and just about how local artists can be supported. And the ABC, I think, could be really helpful with that. Secondly, about artists being eligible that were included in the first collection, I would ask that we all do consider that a lot of those artists have been adversely affected due to the pandemic, due to the tornado. Artists that I can think of, one in particular that was in the collection that's not represented, I think, by anyone, but lost their studio in the tornado. And so I would think that we might want to be thoughtful about just the exclusion because they were in the first round. Maybe just be thoughtful about that piece, especially since we're talking all local artists and so many have been affected. And just because they were included 2 years ago does not mean they're not as relevant or as in need now. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks
I'm
for offering that up.
Van, I'm curious whether there's a way to weight the scores. So if we were to allow previously people who've been previously involved, is there a way to weight the scores where need is higher, and if you participated, maybe you get maybe your points are lower somehow, or so that we're trying to sort of balance it, but we're not excluding. Is that possible?
I think it's absolutely possible to kind of use that short essay question about need as a scoring criteria. I wouldn't want to deduct points from anyone if we're also going to allow folks to apply again who have already been selected. But I also want to say, this could be something that we wrestle with once we get to that list of artists who, are scoring really high, and we're in that second part, moving closer to making decisions around who we are going to purchase work from. If there is a debate between two folks whose score is very similar and maybe we're torn about, who we want to fund, given that we don't have bazillions of dollars, that's a great time to kind of discuss need and how we want to prioritize certain things. And I will say the selection committee has access to the application so they can go back. I think there are many ways that we can kind of formally make sure that that's built into our process, but that can also be something that we revisit again or double down on if there is a question of, okay, we've got 60 folks, we can only, if we're at this price, we can only probably buy something from this person or that person or whatnot, because there is a little bit of a shell game when it comes to purchasing this work. And you have to wrestle with the fact that if someone's cost more, that means we're not able to buy other works. And so I think there's a lot of layers to the access question, to the need question, and eligibility.
Alejandro, I see your hand raised. Do you want to?
Yeah, I think Vanna, you actually sort of already kind of answered it through inference, but I was asking, and maybe we've talked about this before, but I'm just not remembering if there was like a specific dollar amount that we use as a guideline for purchasing works, or if it sort of fluctuates. And I feel like, based on your suggestion or conversation, that things fluctuate, maybe not necessarily wildly, but they do fluctuate depending on the work. So I'm just wondering a little bit about, if we're evaluating artists based on a dollar amount per certain, where we distribute all these funds at the same, in the same amount, or if we're sort of like, 10,000 goes to this artist and 2,000 goes to this artist, and, and how we sort of navigate that conversation.
Well, and I'll let Ann Leslie speak to that, but I also want to offer up, and I'm sorry, because I know that I feel like every time we kind of come to a decision about one of these things, we open up the portal again, thinking about purchasing work maybe at a lower price point. I think the idea of purchasing multiples is something that we've done in the past. So yes, one person's work might be 10,000, whereas somebody else is only asking 700 for a print. That's when I think purchasing multiple works or a series of works has been kind of an appealing option for us in a way that we've found to kind of balance the investment. But yeah, and I think also thinking about the purpose of this work. We are still hoping to pursue this lending library. So I think, we're probably going to be looking at work that's, I would say, not to exceed an 18 by 24 or somewhere in that ballpark range, because we want people to be able to safely transport it. And we're also thinking about, is it 2-dimensional? Is it 3-dimensional? How, the fragility of it, and all of those kind of decisions that we'll have to make before a purchase. We do have a procurement cap. So we cannot, Metro Arts cannot spend more than $25,000 without having a full-fledged contract with someone. We would like to avoid having to execute contracts with however many folks. It takes months just to get one. So to do multiple would put us, we would all quit. There would be just a spontaneous walkout. Just kidding, we wouldn't do that. Yeah, so that's kind of our not to exceed by procurement's rules. However, I think if we want to say, in order to spread the wealth, we're not going to purchase anything over a certain dollar amount, we can have that conversation too.
So Donna, you're not on mute, so I want to call on you if you have something to say. And Campbell, you have your hand raised.
Hey, it's Campbell. Just a thought, is there any way we could include in the submission maybe a question within the application about need?
Yes. Yep.
For example, yep. Have you lost your job due to the, whatever that would look like without it being too invasive?
That's exactly what we would do. And so we have done that with the Artist Relief Thrive funds that were in April. And we've also included that question on our Madison on My Mind
Right, exactly. I was
Yep.
thinking you could just mimic that and then
Exactly.
just move that over.
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't want to cut off conversation about this, but I do also, we have another thing to consider, which is the composition of the selection panel. So does anyone have any other thoughts on the current slide that's up about the eligibility requirements? Campbell, are you your hand's just still raised, or you got another?
All right, I'll take it down.
No, you're fine. Okay, so then can we move the conversation back a slide to the composition of the committee, and ask if anyone on this body wants to serve, doesn't want to serve, and have a quick conversation about that. Grace, can you move it back a slide? That one. So I think this is the other question that we need to consider, is do folks on this body, are we interested and willing to serve as members of the selection panel? If we are, do we think anyone additional is important to add to the committee? I think the concern there being meeting the number of people who need to serve in order for the committee to function. And she was met with stunned silence.
And I will say we do have a teeny bit of flexibility. If it is PAC who's doing the selecting, so I still think we do need more votes just to make sure that everyone's able to kind of make decisions effectively. But Donna, I'll and Leslie and I will follow up with you. As typically as chair, you do not have a voting role. If it's PAC, I'm wondering if we could allow you to vote too, because I think if we could get to 5, I would feel confident. But let me quadruple check before I say that.
Okay.
Even though I've already said it.
Yeah. And Nikki, I think you were having technical difficulties at the time that Paul and Alejandro nominated themselves, offered to serve. So we just have at least.
I heard Paul, but I didn't hear Alejandro, so I'm thrilled to hear that.
Yes.
So that looks like it takes us 3. Obviously, Omari isn't on the call, and we can certainly ask him. Campbell, you've raised your hand.
I would be happy to serve. I don't know if I need to recuse myself from serving because I may have artists that are applying.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So, but I did just have a thought. Is it okay? So I was thinking about, for example, like for us, someone like Ellen Pryor as an outside person, are grantees that have GOS funding from Metro, are they eligible to serve in a capacity on a committee or no, if they're an employee of a grantee?
Yeah, that's fine. We had Mark Scala who participated and served on the first phase
Right,
selection.
exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I would say yes. The reason why we were trying to kind of keep it contained to Public Art Committee is just because the more folks from outside organizations that we pull in, the harder meeting coordination tends to be. That being said, I think if we felt really strongly about having someone from outside the organization or outside of PAC, we are totally on board with that. I think we just need to, I just want to caution the having too many folks, just because I know it will slow down the selection process. And we do, again, I think getting folks paid quickly is kind of one of our highest priorities.
David, I would love to turn the floor over to you.
Yeah, I don't mind serving on the selection panel as well.
Yay.
David, you're so awesome. You always, you're like, you're my pack MVP. If someone's going to step up, I know it's always David. He's like, I'll do it. We're like, thank you. Yes, yes.
Well, and
You're
Paul,
so generous with your time. Thank you.
Paul, did you have
Welcome.
anything you wanted to add? I noticed you raised your hand.
Well, yeah, I did. Even though it may create some coordination issues, I think the having outside voices is always important and valued. So I would, if possible, urge for somebody inclusion of other people. So maybe if we're talking about target organizations, if we're talking about tornado relief, if there's anybody in organizations through the path of the tornado across North Nashville and East Nashville, if there's, I don't know how best to target it, but I think it would be great to get voices from outside of, we all know each other, you know? So.
Yeah. I think if we had just two people from the outside would be great, particularly if I can't vote.
Yep. And I will say, I agree. I do think there's a lot of value added from outside perspective. I do want to make sure that whoever we kind of recommend for this role or invite them to participate is also going to kind of be looking at these submissions with the same commitment to equity and asking those challenging questions. So if anybody on PAC has a recommendation of someone who they do feel like would serve that capacity well, please let us know. I'm also feel like any opportunity to plug in curators of color is something that we're constantly working towards and working on at the staff level. So if you have people who are doing great work and would be a great fit, please let Ann Leslie or I know. We'll be so grateful for those recommendations.
Alejandro and Campbell.
Yeah, I just wanted to to sort of like mimic again or echo sort of outside panelists, in part because I'm looking at the voting members in the PAC right now that have elected to be on the selection, and noting that we're all men. And so I just want to make sure that we're mindful of who's voting as part of that selection committee. So when we're thinking about outside people, to maybe think about other non-male members to be inclusive in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Love that, Alejandro. Love that.
Okay. Any other conversation around the selection panel or around eligibility?
I think we have what we need. I don't want to limit any discussion, but I think you all have given us so much great feedback and ideas. I think we have enough that we can kind of pull together and firm up these last few details.
Excellent.
Based on this conversation.
And Leslie, would you like to present the motion?
Well, let me just clarify. So if we want to identify the individuals from the PAC, I have, Donna and Paul and Alejandro, David, John, Nikki, were you interested?
Yeah,
I didn't. Okay. All right. I didn't know if I had you down or not. So, okay. So that gives us, and then we can then open it up to Amari, contact him to see if he's interested as well. That would be.
I think that's important to do.
Yet another one. And then I'm hearing that there's strong interest in having at least two outside voices. And
potentially not men.
And not men, yes. And of course, as Van mentioned, we want to look into if, as a PAC member, in addition to being on the selection panel, if Donna would be able to vote. And then, of course, what we're getting at is having an odd number of voting members. So if we can work in some flexibility there. So our action requested would be staff request a PAC motion and approval for a selection panel for the Public Art Acquisitions Artworks 2 to be composed of Donna Gilliam as chair, Paul Collins, Alejandro Acierto, David John Walker, Nikki Kaufman, possibly Omari Booker, and up to 2 outside panelists.
Thank you, Ann Leslie. So that's the motion. Do I have anyone who would like to bring it? Alejandro? Wait, no. Who did I say could do it? David?
I make a motion to for the approval of the selection panel.
Excellent. Do I have a second? Alejandro?
Alejandro, so moved. Second, I mean.
Excellent. Now we're going to do a roll call vote for those in favor. Campbell?
In favor?
Excellent. Donna?
In favor?
Thank you. Alejandro?
In favor.
Alejandro?
In favor.
Excellent. David?
In favor?
Excellent. Paul?
In favor. Yes. Hello. Yes.
Excellent. Paul and I, Nikki Kaufman, also move to approve. Super.
Thank you for all of your hard work, Ann Leslie. You've put a lot of time and energy into this, and we're grateful for it.
Metro Art staff will now update us on other public art initiatives.
Okay, so I will do this very quickly. Let's see, Grace, you can go to the next slide for me. Thank you. We have our NEA Creativity Connects grant, which we were previously calling Love Letters to Madison. We now have a fabulous official title for it, Madison on My Mind. And we have released a call to artists, inviting Madison-based artists and creatives to propose projects, creative kind of love offerings to a Madison-based local business or public space. So we will be receiving or reviewing proposals through Monday, August 24th. And I will work with our amazing communication lead, Emily Waltenbug, to send everybody on the PAC some additional information so you can help us also spread the word on this opportunity for Madison-based artists. We are also super excited to let you all know that DTLJ, I can't speak anymore, Daily to Le Jour, who is the Artist Collective Commission for the Mill Ridge Park Public Art Project. They have agreed to do a redesign, and it has been really productive, really collaborative, super respectful. We had a great conversation and a very honest conversation with Parks about what parts of the partnership and the way we're all communicating didn't work last time and how we're going to avoid it this time. And we are in the process of finalizing that contract amendment. So they did present an increased budget to kind of meet these needs that we've kind of uncovered through our first failed design attempt. But Trey did a really great job kind of helping them navigate this space and to make sure that all conversations were really collaborative and honest and transparent. So we're super enthusiastic about moving forward. And then finally, I don't know how many of you noticed, maybe all of you, maybe none of you, but one of our favorite artworks in our public art collection, Light Meander, has been on the struggle bus basically for the last year. So we're super excited that we are going to have a fully functioning Lake Meander, which we can all safely drive by and wave to, since hanging out in public spaces downtown probably isn't the wisest. But thanks to Anne Leslie and her diligence in making sure our public art collection stays looking good, we're about to start that work. So that's it for what we've got for all today.
Excellent. Anyone have any questions before I let you all return to the rest of your lives?
Thank you all so much. I mean, we're so humbled by just the thoughtfulness, the time that you guys give us, your brain and emotional energy. All of it. It's so helpful.
All right. Well, thank you guys.
all.
Thank you,
What she said.
staff, for the great presentations, and thank you all for your time. And we are adjourned.
Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you guys.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Just a few more days.